Welcome back to 50 Days to Rebuild, the series where I do 50 minutes of exercise and read 50 pages of a physio book in a day in an attempt to rehab myself. This is day 25. Jumping straight into the McGill Big 3, been pretty happy in terms of the curl up. I feel like that's going pretty well with the new way that I'm sort of cueing the neck squeeze. And then also looking at the side plank, pretty happy with how that's going. It looks like things are actually progressing in the right direction. Specifically on that point, I'm starting to get a bit of a glute squeeze even in the starting position. So previously I spoke about how once I came up into the sort of up position that I was getting a bit of a glute squeeze and it felt like my body wanted to get into some, I guess, hip external rotation. And this time I sort of just naturally felt like I should be cueing that movement from the get-go, and it felt better. I think, again, this was because my knees were feeling a bit janky today, so getting the squeeze initially really made me feel a bit more safe. And that squeeze didn't jump, it didn't strum into the TFL like it normally does. It felt like I was just able to get the rotation and maintain position, which is quite rare. I haven't really had that before. I don't know why this is now available to me. This is something that I've tried to do before. I think, some time ago I massaged like my glutes and my TFL, but it's been quite a while since then. The only thing that I can really think of here is that I have been doing the glute medius and maximus activations, so maybe doing those activations is helping during these movements. But either way, pretty happy with everything that's happening there. Now, unfortunately, that is where the joy ends. Looking at the bird dog, I spent ages on this today, just frustrated. Tried to basically start by relieving the psoas with massage. So I used the Right, which is like a little U-shaped hard piece of plastic to really get into the psoas. Struggled at first to find it, but then did the sort of slumped psoas activation from Eric Wong. Got a nice activation, so I knew where to target. I sort of held the activation and then laid down onto it. That was good. Sort of did that on top of a bench so that I could essentially do the whole PNF contract relax thing with massage and be able to relax a bit better, have some flossing ability, so ability to sort of move my leg around. But when I came back to the bird dog, really just not seeing any gains from it. Then tried to do the hip flexor stretch from Pavel using the same contract relax approach. Felt like I was getting some range. Come back to the bird dog, no progress. Then tried doing the same thing but with more of a variation of the McGill way of doing it. So that sort of lateral flexion, rotation and extension with the PNF combo, which admittedly McGill didn't talk about doing that PNF combo with it, but I thought I'd give it a go. Again, felt good. Coming to the bird dog, not seeing anything. This was pissing me off beyond belief. Tried to watch some stuff from like Brian Carroll to see like, am I cueing it wrong? But he's using relatively simple cues, and then now I feel like I'm not feeling my lats. Like, it's just a whole spiral of things. The biggest thing I did change, where I started to note some lack of hyperextension, some return to neutral, was just aggressively trying to keep my ribs down and not thinking about sternum up at all. I don't think sternum up is wrong. I think that's actually probably a good cue. I just think that I tend towards a thoracic hinge and I break at the ribs and they flare, and that's what is happening now. I was able to keep them down a bit towards the end, I think. So it's starting to look a bit better. Unfortunately, and I'm not ready to say it for sure yet, but I might have to regress this further back to like on a bench. So it's at like a 45-degree angle. I hope that's not the case, but that might be something I have to do. Looking at what I learned today, so I finished Super Joints by Pavel Sassoline. This book has frankly just confused me. It's very simply written, and I love Pavel, I love his work. But normally I feel like the principles of his work are very well outlined, and I really struggle to differentiate the point of this book, which was published at the same time as the book I just read, which was Relax and to Stretch. This got further convoluted by the second portion of the book, which he said you could interchange with the stretches from relax and to stretch, almost like we were moving away from joint mobilization and into stretching. I don't really understand what's happening here. Again, I think potentially some of it's to do with like just getting some joint mobilization without trying to get a big squeeze or a big stretch. But then we're seeing some like really deep range of motion movements to do this. I guess that's not contradictory but I don't know, it hasn't been very well articulated, like how you should be going about this compared to the stretches, at least from how I'm seeing it. That being said, there were a few pieces of useful information that I think would be good to transfer over. So one was just a stretching technique, which is reaching for a mark. This is basically just using something external to reach for to cue your body to be able to go further. So for example, if I was just standing straight with my arm out to the side, and I reached for the wall, that external cue that I'm reaching for can be helpful to make me increase my range of motion. There were some examples here where he said, do it so that it's difficult but feasible, but then some others that were like genuinely impossible, but they are meant to cue the maximum amount of range of motion. Like for example, in the cat-camel, as you were going into the extension part, if you tried to get your eyes to the back wall, it will never happen, but that was the example he gave that could be helpful to get more range. Okay, I'm pretty sure I'm gonna butcher this next one. They called it the Ukatomsky reflex. He sort of just colloquially referred to this as the Pink Panther. So essentially it was pushing against an isometric force and suddenly, surprisingly, having the resistance disappear, and that essentially we would still have some force generation trying to push forward, and then the antagonist would also have a further relaxation. Right, so for example, if we were standing and trying to get knee to chest, and I had my hand pushing down to resist that motion, then all of a sudden I released it, or better yet, had somebody else randomly release it for me, that my knee would rapidly sort of accelerate up, and this would get me more range of motion. He did say here, it's probably best to have A, like for most of these, somebody else doing it, it's a bit hard to do it on your own, and B, to only allow them to go about an inch so that we don't really push past what's safe. The key thing here was we had sort of shallow breathing and that we just don't anticipate the release, otherwise we'll tense up. One thing that I did find very helpful to hear him say, because sometimes people talk about sort of short and tight and then long and weak, and he sort of clarified this in a better way, I think. He said short and weak or stretched and weak. Like, they're both weak, they're both in a compensated pattern. If they're long and weak, they're just weak, and if they're short and weak, once we take them into an eccentric, elongated stretch position, they will be weak. And I thought that was a really helpful way of conceptualizing it, because I'm often sort of perplexed by what might be the thing that needs to be strengthened, and this seems to be saying, well, both. In terms of some specific exercise slash stretch slash mobilization, whatever these things are, cues that I thought would be helpful, to do with dislocates, because that's something that I was working on for quite a bit. He said you really want to try and stretch the bar apart, which goes along with what I've been trying to think of for, say, like a bench press or for the bird dog, which again, unfortunately hasn't been working recently. But I did find success with that cue initially. So that's good to hear. He's saying you really need to stretch it apart as much as you can and keep your elbows and everything locked so that you don't injure your shoulders. The last thing I found kind of confusing, which is around extension postures. So when I'm looking at these pictures, it's really hard to tell if he has a neutral spine and then just crazy hip extension, or if maybe more realistically we're getting something more close like a global extension. And I actually think that's probably what's occurring in a lot of these positions, like a bridge, for example. And even the way he discussed it, like try and get elongation from like each vertebra from the head down to like the foot. That sounds like we're going for a global extension. It's not, let's try and get a bit of extension, then have a rigid unbending core, and then get extension. And I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with that. Like McGill would say we have rehab and then we have performance. It's just that Pavel has talked about previously in relax into stretch, like not bending about the spine, but again, then sometimes it looks like he's moving about the spine in something like this bridge. But then he also says be wary not to get excessive bend through it, excessive arch. So to me it sounds like he's okay with it as long as it's sort of equally shared through the vertebra. That it's global, it's a balanced extension, not like a lumbar hinge. On this point, there was something said here about how to sort of train extension of the spine in a low sort of disc load way, and apparently the argument here is that you want to hang on a pull-up bar while in extension of like the whole spine and head, and the next level up from that is doing a pull-up like that, so essentially pulling the stomach to the bar, but just hanging there they think will sort of train that motion and extension in a relatively safe way. So that's cool to hear, considering that's something I've been trying to wrap my head around, is like, how can we safely train spine motion, if at all? And this seems to be a step towards that. Yeah, that is about it for day 25. We are officially halfway through the challenge. I would like to be further with the McGill Big 3. It sort of is what it is. As I said, I'm closer to understanding the whole mechanism around stretching. This has sort of thrown a bit of confusion into the mix, but I think I'm close. I did also start a new book, but to be honest, I'm only about 10 pages in, and it's essentially just recapping some math and physics right now, so nothing too interesting to hear about. But yeah, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.